Hello again, thanks for stopping by. My name is Duncan Taborda from Class 1 School of English, and today's tutorial is going to be a short tutorial on conditionals. Conditionals are an absolutely fantastic way to expand your English, to expand your skills, your reading, your writing, and it's something that you do all the time. It really is. Think about how many times in a day you start off a sentence with if. If you start off a sentence with if, you are speaking in a conditional, but you might not be getting exactly the right blend. You might not be doing it in exactly the right way. So that's what I'm here to do. I'm going to show you 4 conditionals, and I'll explain to you how you should use each one. Okay, and then hopefully, as I say, that's going to improve your speaking skills, your writing skills, probably even your reading skills. Okay, so what is a conditional? Well, basically a conditional is a sentence or a question, and it has 2 parts to the sentence, to the sentence or the question. It has 2 clauses. The different parts of sentences we call clauses. Like the guy who brings you your present on Christmas Day, Santa Claus. Okay? Now, one clause, for one clause to happen is dependent on the other clause happening as well. Okay, so it's like a condition. A condition of one clause happening is that the other clause must happen as well. Okay, so that's to put it in a basic way. But let me explain it by writing. I'm going to do the 4, like I say, 4 conditionals. The first one is the zero conditional. Now the zero conditional is used when something is absolute fact. It's like scientific fact. So for example, if you heat ice, it melts. I think you'll agree with that. Nobody can argue with that. It's a scientific fact. If you heat ice, it melts. Okay? Again, you can't argue with that. If it rains, the ground gets wet. Okay? Now, can you see the tenses the tense that I've used for both clauses? One clause, second clause. They are both the present simple. Okay? In the zero conditional, both clauses are the present simple, because this is scientific fact, this is the zero conditional. Now you don't have to have this structure, okay? The resulting clause, we call the first part the if clause, we call the second part the resulting clause. So basically, if this happens, this will be the result. If this happens, this will be the result. You don't have to have it like that. You can flip it on its head. So you can have the resulting clause at the beginning. Like I've said so often, that's the beauty of English. Very versatile, very rich, you can change things around. Let me do that with these 2 sentences. So, okay, let's do that first one. There you have it. I've put the resulting clause at the beginning, I've put the if clause at the end. Exactly the same meaning. It's exactly the same meaning. Now, when you're speaking, there's nothing to think about. You're just flipping the 2 clauses on its head. The only time is something different. If you notice, when I put the if clause in the second part of the sentence, I don't have a comma after the resulting clause. It's just continuing. But if the if is at the beginning, then you would have a comma after that clause, okay? So either side, you can also make that negative, okay? The ground, so for example, you can say the ground, let's change this. Let's talk about the ice, okay? Ice doesn't stay frozen. Okay? Ice doesn't stay frozen if you heat it. Okay? Or you could say ice doesn't melt if you don't heat it. So there I've got the negative as well. The ground doesn't get wet if it doesn't rain. So you can use the conditionals in the negative as well. You can also use it in a question. So, if it rains, does the ground get wet? Yeah? If it rains, does the ground get wet? Or does the ground get wet if it rains? Okay, so you can use it positive, negative, and in a question. Alright? But always, as you can see, the zero conditional, present simple, present simple. Okay? So that's a zero conditional when it's a scientific fact. Okay? When it's you can't argue with it. Right, let's move on now to the first conditional. The first conditional. What the first conditional deals with here is a very likely thing happening, a very likely occurrence. In your opinion, you think that what's going to happen is quite likely in the future. All right. So, for example, let's do this one again. Okay. If it rains, I will get wet. Now, you might say, hang on, this should be in the zero conditional because this is a fact. If it rains, I should get wet. It's not absolutely, it's not an absolute fact because I might be under a bus stop. I might have an umbrella. I might be in a shop, okay? But it's very likely, it's very, very likely that I will get wet if it rains. So look at how this one's made up now. The if clause is still the present simple, but the resulting clause, I've now got will plus the base form of the verb. Will is a modal verb, which I've covered before. You cannot have any other form of the verb apart from the base form after it. So, if it rains, I will get wet. Like I said, you can flip that. I will get wet if it rains. You can make it a question. If it rains, will I get wet? Will I get wet if it rains? All sorts, okay? But basically, this covers a very likely happening in the future. Okay, so you start off with present simple, and the resulting clause you have will plus base form. So that's the first conditional. Not an absolute fact, but a very, very likely occurrence. And don't forget, it's very subjective. This is in your mind. If you think it's very likely, you would use the first conditional. Okay, so there we have two, zero conditional, first conditional. I'm now going to move on to the second conditional. Second conditional. Now, this is a very confusing conditional for when people first start learning it, okay? What the second conditional deals with is a very unlikely event in the future, again, in your mind, okay? It may happen, but it's very unlikely. This is what you think. And we're talking about the future. However, even though we are talking about the future, look at this structure. Okay, I'll remind you again, we're talking about the future. We're talking about something very unlikely in the future. However, look at this. If I won the lotto, won is the past tense of to win. But I'm still using it to talk about the future. That's because it's very unlikely. I think it's very unlikely, and this is how we structure it for that condition. If I won the lotto, I would buy. So in the resulting clause, you've got the modal verb would. Again, like I said before, after the modal verb, nothing. The verb doesn't change. The second verb, it's always the base form. I would buy a new house. Okay. So look at this structure now. After the if clause, it's past simple. Past simple. In the resulting clause, would plus the base form of the verb. Okay. Again, you can flip that on its head. I would buy a house if I won the lotto. Would I buy a house if I won the lotto? If I won the lotto, would I buy a house? Okay, so question, negative and positive. But second conditional, a very unlikely event in the future, or at the very least, you think it's a very unlikely event. Okay, not impossible, but very unlikely. All right, and that is how we would use it. If plus the past simple plus would plus the base form of the verb. Okay, so that's the zero conditional. And the last one, the third conditional. Okay, we sometimes call this the impossible conditional because it's dealing with the past. It's dealing with something that's over with. You cannot change it. Okay, so what's the point of using it? If it's something that we can't change, it's happened, we can't do anything about, why do we use it? Believe you me, we use it all the time. It's a fantastic conditional to use when you're expressing regret or when you're trying to express how things might have been if something was done in a different way. Everybody uses it. Politicians use it. Okay, the President of America uses it. And let me show you why. First of all, let me show you how it's made up, okay? So the third conditional starts off with if I had studied. Do you recognize this structure? This form? Okay, this is known as the past perfect. Click on one of my other videos, which is actually called the past perfect, and that'll explain exactly how you form it and why we use it. But we've got this. The past starts off with the past perfect. If I had studied. If I had studied, I would have passed my exam. So, in the if clause, you've got the past perfect plus would have. Not just would have. It's a very common combination in English, okay, would have. When you're expressing regret or something that you can't change, but if you could change it, that's what you would do, all right? So, if I had studied, I would have passed my exam. I would have passed my exam if I had studied. Again, you can flip it on its head. And the question, if I had studied, would I have passed my exam? Would I have passed my exam if I had studied? So question, positive, negative, question can all be done, okay? And like I said, this is always talking about something that is finished, okay? And if you thought about how you could have changed that, yeah, this is what you would use, the third conditional. So I said politicians use it all the time. Yes, politicians use it all the time. Donald Trump might say, if Barack Obama had been a better president, we would have, and then put a base form of the verb. Yeah, would have, let me explain. You have would have, okay, so have follows would as the base form because would is the modal verb. However, you might have heard me before in one of my previous tutorials tell you that another thing in English that never changes is any verb following have or had or has must be in the past participle. Has to be in the past participle because it's have here. So would have passed my exam if Barack Obama had been a better president. this country would have succeeded a lot more. Yeah, this country would have been a richer country. Okay, so everybody uses it, politicians use it. It's fantastic, fantastic. Practice the third conditional. Think about things that are finished that you want to talk about. Maybe you're expressing regret. Maybe you're advising someone else about how they could have done something different. Be careful, like I mentioned before. It can come across the wrong way. You can offend someone by doing this, especially if you're giving advice about how they could have done something differently that had turned out bad. Yeah, it can be considered to be a bit offensive. So be careful how you say it. But yeah, it's used all the time. Third conditional. Okay, something that's already in the past. It's finished. It's gone. You're just expressing a regret. You're talking about how things might have been different. Okay. So there we go. 4 conditionals. 0 conditional, first conditional, second conditional, and third conditional. 0 conditional, when it's an absolute fact. You can't deny it. It's a scientific fact. First conditional, when it's talking about a very likely event in the future, which you think is very likely. The second conditional, an event that you think is very unlikely in the future. Something that you think is very unlikely to happen. And the third conditional, talking about the past, something that's already finished, you cannot change it, but you're talking about how you would change it if you could have done it, yeah? Let's look at a football commentary. If Rooney had crossed that ball, Pogba would have scored a goal, okay? Again, it's finished. Rooney didn't cross the ball. Pogba didn't score a goal. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. This is what would have happened. Alright, so 4 conditionals. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, why not subscribe to my channel? It's not going to cost you anything, and you will be informed every time I load a new video. It's been great talking to you. Please stop by again soon, and then until you do, over and out.